Welcome to Health Beat Live. My name is Sara and I am reporting for Healthy NewsWorks from Norristown, Pennsylvania. On this video call with me is Stephen Fried. He's an award-winning journalist, professor, and author. His most recent book is about Benjamin Rush, who is one of the nation's founding fathers, and a doctor. Dr. Rush treated patients during the 1793 yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia. Mr. Fried, thank you for taking the time to appear on Health Beat Live.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
My first question is, what was it like in Philadelphia during the 1793 yellow fever epidemic?
It was a nightmare. And if you think that being locked in our houses right now and being so protective is a difficult thing, imagine being in a city, the largest city in America, in the hottest time of the year when everybody is afraid of dying. No one knows how the fever is transmitted. Everybody's afraid. They don't want to touch each other. They don't want to come near each other. They believe that it might be in the air. So they're doing all kinds of things to make the air different. They're smoking cigars. They're putting garlic around their necks. They're putting ropes dipped in tar around their necks. The city reeks of everything that people are trying to do to make the fever go away. On top of the fact that it reeked anyway. There was no sewage at that time. People just threw stuff into the river. So it was a time of great fear. Most of the doctors left town, which is why the handful of doctors like Benjamin Rush are considered great heroes, even if some of their treatments didn't work so well. Because they didn't have enough doctors, they asked the African-American clergy and their parishioners to help them treat patients. And so what we had were white doctors and African-American reverends and people from the Black church helping to do the treatments, and they also did all the burials because people were going through the streets with carts asking people to bring bodies out that they were put into, usually into mass graves. It was the worst. It's just so intense. And Benjamin Rush writes all about it. He's writing home to his wife almost every day. She's up in Princeton with the kids. And he's just describing this, endless thing. Here's friends of ours who died today. And at the same time, the doctors are fighting each other about what the right treatment is because no one knows. The limits of science at this time are such a heavy burden on them. And so when we don't have enough science, we have arguments between people, political arguments, and that's what really happened. It was 24-hour-a-day fear. And then it just stopped. Because it got cold, the mosquitoes that were carrying it died, and it just ended.
What were the symptoms of yellow fever?
Well, yellow fever starts like, sort of all fevers, fever, chills, head pain, but it advanced very quickly. I mean, the course of the disease was often 3 or 4 days. So unlike, something that unfolds more quickly, and keep in mind, it's already flu season. So just as we are trying to figure out who has the coronavirus and who has just normal flu, they were also dealing with, sort of the regular fall illnesses that people got. And then at a certain point, when the people's eyes turned yellow, when their skin turned yellow, and their symptoms became so extreme, and they also would vomit, black vomit, that's when they knew for sure that they had yellow fever. And if they were at that point, they might not be living through the night.
How did people get infected with yellow fever?
Well, they were infected by mosquitoes, but they didn't know that. So, in fact, the biggest argument in the city, people were arguing in the city about everything about this fever. There was such a lack of science at this time. So there was a huge debate about how people got it, whether they could give it to each other, and whether it originated in Philadelphia or whether it had been brought in on a boat from somewhere else. We now know that yellow fever was most likely brought in on a boat from the tropics, and both people that had it, who the mosquitoes bit and brought their blood to other people, and probably bugs that were on the boat as the boat was coming to shore. But at the time, the initial belief was that there was some really bad coffee that had gone bad on a boat that had been dumped on the wharf there. So they believed that the fever originated from that bad coffee. And that was one of the operative theories because originally everybody who had it was right near that wharf. But eventually it spread throughout the whole city very quickly, frighteningly quickly.
How long did the yellow fever epidemic go on in Philadelphia, and when did it die out?
It started in the middle of August, but they didn't realize till the end of August that it had already started. And it began petering out as soon as it got cold in the beginning of November. And it was gone within the first week or two of November. And then there were no more cases. And it just disappeared because all the mosquitoes died because it was cold.
What are the similarities and differences between the yellow fever epidemic in 1793 and today's pandemic with the coronavirus?
I think one of the basic ones is the basic American fight between the desire for the government to step up with the best science and people to be free to do whatever they want. Also, there were huge fights between doctors. I think we have less of that during coronavirus, but the biggest aspect of this at this time was that the doctors were very hugely disagreeing about what the treatment should be. And because they couldn't treat enough people, many doctors had fled the city, they put their treatments in the newspaper. Because you could also, this is before doctors were licensed, and some of the treatments you could just buy yourself. If you wanted to have bloodletting, you could call somebody at your house and have them bloodlet you. A doctor didn't have to write for that. So it was sort of a free-for-all, and I think that the doctors had never seen anything like this. They knew they weren't going to get to everybody. So in one of the first true acts of public health, they published their prescriptive ideas in the newspaper, fighting about these things in the newspaper, and then people would get the treatments they wanted based on what they read in the newspaper, which is not the best way to run public health. But these doctors were really disagreeing. And keep in mind, at that time, they had so little of the scientific information that we have. There's no way to test for what these people had at all. But it was really a free-for-all, and there's a lot to learn from the failure of the doctors to stick together. They really attacked each other so much that you could easily fear like, well, no doctors know anything if they're all fighting with each other so much about this. But I think what we always find even today, that when science is lacking, politics steps in. And partisan politics stepped in just as it has in our coronavirus. In fact, there were two parties, the Republicans and the Federalists, and the one treatment was called the Federalist treatment and the other treatment was called the Republican treatment. So you shouldn't be picking your medical treatments based on politics, but people did then, and sadly, sometimes they do now.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Freed.
It was my pleasure.